Hi, friend. Welcome to day 3 of Galatians chapter 2. I got to tell you, I was not expecting much for this passage this morning. I thought, here's kind of a conclusion, or maybe a conclusion to where Paul has been. I took so much away from this passage. Let's go ahead and read, and we'll talk about it. Galatians chapter 2, verse 11. But when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he was eating with the Gentiles. But when they came, he drew back and separated himself, fearing the circumcision party. And the rest of the Jews acted hypocritically along with him, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them all, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you force the Gentiles to live like Jews? All right. Well, let's just talk about first the who. That's where I began today to unpack this. We have, once again, of course, we have Paul, right? He's writing the letter. And we have Peter, we have James, we have Barnabas, we have Gentiles, and we have Jews. And Paul has been unpacking all of this for us, this difference between the Jews and the Gentiles. He's mostly focused on the difference of circumcision. But here he is talking about the difference in dietary requirements and ceremonial things when it comes to eating that the Jews follow. This is the letter of the law to them, and they view as the Jewish believers. Some of them, let's just say the Jews back in the first century, viewed Gentiles as unclean because they didn't practice those dietary restrictions. They didn't practice the ceremonial things prior to eating. They didn't practice circumcision. So in their eyes, the Gentiles, the Greeks, were unclean. All right, and that kind of comes out here in today's passage. Now, yesterday we saw all of these people in Jerusalem, and it was like one big happy family, really. They were all in agreement. They all preach the same gospel, the same good news about Jesus Christ being God's salvation, being God's rescue from sin and death. The only difference is who they're preaching to. Peter, James, John are preaching to the Jews, and Paul and Barnabas are preaching to the Gentiles. All right, that's it. Everything else is the same. They seem like one big happy family. But today, in today's passage, we find, Paul sets us up for conflict, right? Where are they? Where does this take place now? They're no longer in Jerusalem, the land of, I'm going to say the land of the Jews, right? Here's the heart of the Jewish faith. Here's where the temple was. Now they are in Antioch. Antioch, I looked this up. It's always helpful to kind of understand geography a little bit. Antioch is 300 miles north of Jerusalem. It is in Syria. So it's actually an important trade center at the time. A good number of Jews lived in Antioch, and it became an important spot in the early church. We see Antioch several times in the book of Acts. And it's also, this is just an interesting fun fact. This is where disciples were first called Christians. All right, Christians, followers of Christ. I think that's all we need to say. We really don't need to say anything more about Antioch. This is just the where this story takes place. All right, so we've talked about the who, we've talked about the where. Now, what happens there? Well, Paul opposes Peter. What does it mean to oppose someone? To be against, to express opposition, which is exactly what Paul says he does. He expresses opposition towards Peter. And our antennas ought to go up here. Peter, the pillar, a pillar of the faith. Yes. All right. So we have to ask the why question. Why would Paul express opposition towards Peter? Well, he goes on to explain, starting in verse 12, that before certain men came from James, remember, James was in Jerusalem. So before these men from Jerusalem, Jews or Jewish believers came, Peter, he's just having a good old time with all of the Gentiles. He eats with them, no problem, which again is something we said that a Jew would never do. All right, so this is a big change for the Jewish believers, right? It has been their custom to keep themselves separated from the Gentiles because the Gentiles do not follow all of the cleanliness laws and are not circumcised. They keep themselves separated. So this is something new through Christ, right? Before these Jewish believers come, Peter, he's having a good old time. And we see that Peter himself knows this. One of the cross references is Acts chapter 10, verse 28. This is Peter on his way to Joppa, Acts 10:28. And Peter said to some people in Joppa, he said, "You yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with or visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean." So God showed Peter this in a vision that he gave Peter. Peter knows, he knows there's no one unclean. There's nothing unclean in God's eyes. All right, so he's having a good old time, but these men show up from Jerusalem, and all of a sudden, Peter begins to what? He begins to separate himself. That's the word that Paul uses in verse 12, separate. It means to exclude. So he excludes the Gentiles from eating with him. Yikes. Yikes. Why? Why would Peter do this? Well, Paul says he did it out of fear of the circumcision party. All right, he did it out of fear of the circumcision party. What is that called? That's called people pleasing. We talked about that back in chapter 1 when Paul describes himself as not being a people pleaser. And boy, do we see that here. He is not afraid to oppose Peter, a pillar of the faith. That's how much Peter is a God pleaser. He's not a people pleaser. Or Paul is did I get that mixed up? I'm sorry if I did. Paul is not a people pleaser. He is a God pleaser. Peter falls into people pleasing because of fear. Can anybody else relate to that? It's almost comforting to see that, yes, a pillar of the faith, even a pillar of the faith, even a pillar of the faith can stumble sometimes. All right. It's good, and it's important for us to know that and recognize that. I'll talk about that in application. All right, I feel like I lost track there. That is the why. Before these men came, Peter's having a good old time with the Gentiles. These Jewish believers come from Jerusalem. He separates himself. He excludes the Gentiles. And then what happens? Oh my goodness, friends, hypocrisy, because Peter is acting in a hypocritical way, and that's what hypocrisy means. It means acting in sincerity by virtue of pretending to have qualities or beliefs that you do not really have. Peter doesn't really believe that the Gentiles are unclean, but he is acting that way. His hypocrisy leads Barnabas astray. It leads the rest of the Jews astray. They all begin acting hypocritically. And fellowship within the body in Antioch is broken. Why, friends? If we stop and think about it, the why is because the gospel is being distorted. And Paul is not going to have any of that. And that is why he opposes Peter. He says in verse 14, "But when I saw that their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them all," Paul calls out Cephas, saying, "If you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew," which is what he was doing before all of these Jewish believers came, "how can you force the Gentiles to live like Jews?" All right, so what's up with this, Peter? So Paul is not having any of it. We said yesterday he is all about the gospel. And really, he is all about the truth and the grace of the gospel of Jesus Christ, such that he would call out Peter a pillar of the faith. And we all ought to just stand back and say, whoa, Paul really is not a people pleaser. He is a God pleaser. And yes, his heart is for the gospel. Paul, the main point I put down, Paul opposes Peter's hypocrisy in order to preserve the truth of the gospel, right? That is Paul's heart here. The gospel, we've talked about it. This is the good news of Jesus Christ. This is the salvation of God. It's by God's grace alone. It's by God's work. It has nothing to do with any of our works. Circumcision adds nothing. Dietary restrictions add nothing. Can we learn something about God from this passage? Friend, we can. Once again, we're reminded of God's grace, that this gospel message is all about grace. It's God's good work in us. And then also, I think we're reminded that God's heart is inclusive of everyone. The gospel message is for everyone. There's nothing exclusive about it. It's all inclusive. All right, really, really important. It gives us a window into God's heart. Now, application. How did you apply this today? Friends, it really jumped out to me that Peter, being this pillar of the faith, stumbled into hypocrisy. I mean, there's a warning there for all of us who are believers. I just think here's a place for a heart check. I ask this question: am I living authentically to my beliefs? Am I living authentically to the grace and the truth of the gospel? Jesus loves all. He includes all. All right. And I think there's just kind of, I guess you would call it a command in a way. Hold fast to the truth and the grace of the gospel, just like Paul does. There's a lot to chew on here for the rest of the day. I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.